The old livestock barn on the outskirts of Burnell, Texas, had long since lost its shine. Years ago, it might have echoed with the lively bartering of cattlemen, the stomp of well-fed horses, or the laughter of kids tugging on their parents' coats, begging to take a puppy home. But now, the wooden beams creaked from age, not energy. Dust clung to every surface like an old secret, and the smell, stale hay, rusted metal, and the faint sourness of resignation hung in the air. Outside, the sun pressed down hard on the tin roof, but inside, the atmosphere was oddly cold. The light from a single overhead bulb flickered above a long row of cages. Dogs of all breeds waited, some pacing anxiously, others barking with the kind of hope that only those unaware of their fate could muster. The barking bounced against the walls like a plea for someone, anyone, to listen. At the very end of the row, away from the German shepherds bred for patrol and the glossy-coated Labradors still wagging their tails, sat a dog that didn't bother barking at all. He was thin, bones visible beneath a patchy coat that once might have been golden brown. His ribs stood out like folded chairs against his sides. His left hind leg was stiff, not completely lame, but enough to give him a slight, noticeable limp when he moved. But that day, he didn't move at all. He just sat, quiet, watching. He was older than most of the dogs here, not aged, but not young either. His eyes, once bright and alert, now carried the dull weight of disappointment. He wasn't scared. Not anymore. Fear was something he'd worn out a long time ago. What he wore now was something more hollow. Detachment. Resignation. Some called him Rusty, though no one really knew his name. It wasn't written on his kennel tag, which simply read, Male, Shepherd Mix, Unknown Age, Slight Injury, Behavior, Unresponsive. People passed his cage without a glance. That one's a no-go, muttered one man in a baseball cap, tugging his young son past Rusty's kennel. Look at his leg. He won't fetch a stick, let alone guard a yard. Yeah, a woman nearby added. Poor thing's just sitting there like he's given up. Kinda spooky. The auctioneer, an older man with a worn clipboard and too many dogs on his hands, gave a half-hearted wave toward the kennel as someone inquired about prices. That one? Nah, don't worry about him. Hurt his leg last month. Been like a statue since. Doesn't bark. Doesn't eat much either. No interest so far, he said, voice low and tired. If nobody takes him by tonight, he's going to the city shelter first thing in the morning. And you know how that ends. No one replied. They didn't need to. Rusty blinked slowly. His ears flicked at the voices, but he didn't lift his head. If he understood what they were saying, and he probably did, he gave no sign of it. He had once belonged somewhere. That much was clear. His posture, even in stillness, had the echo of discipline. His silence wasn't emptiness. It was learned. He wasn't attached by nature. He had been made this way, shaped by something or someone that had taken what was whole and carved it down to a shell. His injuries weren't dramatic. There were no missing limbs or glaring wounds. Just a limp, just a haunted stillness. Just enough damage to make him invisible to people who came looking for happy, wagging tails and eager eyes. Children ran past, laughing and pointing at playful pups that bounced against their cage doors. Their giggles rose like birds in the rafters. But none of them stopped at the end of the row. No one stopped for Rusty. His eyes followed the movement, but not with expectation. They had lost it years ago. What remained in those eyes was a quiet kind of ache, the kind that doesn't scream, the kind that doesn't even ask anymore, just waits. And yet, if someone had been looking close enough, they might have seen the way his gaze softened when a toddler dropped a stuffed toy and a boy picked it up without being asked, or the way his ears turned ever so slightly toward the sound of a slow song playing from a vendor's portable radio, or how his tail gave one small twitch when a kind voice passed by, so subtle it was easy to miss. But no one was looking that closely. Not today. Toward the back wall, near the exit, the auctioneer checked his clipboard again, scratching something with the stub of the pencil. Rusty, he muttered, as if giving the dog a name might make the paperwork easier. One more night. He walked away, in his kennel. Rusty lay down slowly, stretching the injured leg in that practiced, careful way of someone who's learned to move through pain without making a sound. He turned once, circled the bedding made of worn-out towels, and settled into the same corner he always did. As the sun slipped low in the sky, casting orange light to the narrow barn windows, a long shadow stretched across Rusty's cage. It belonged to a girl, small, still, standing so quietly that even the auctioneer didn't notice her. She didn't speak. Not yet, but Rusty's ears flicked once more. Then he turned his head, just slightly, and looked at her. Really looked, and for the first time all day, something shifted in his eyes. Something alive, something waiting, and somewhere very quietly, something the world began to change. Her name was Lily Mae, 8 years old, small for her age, and quiet in a way that made even grown-ups lower their voices around her. She hadn't always been like that. There had been birthday parties with balloons, laughter that spilled to the windows, and songs sung off-key by her mom as they baked cookies on rainy afternoons. There had been joy, easy, natural, and daily, but those days now belonged to a different lifetime. Her mother's illness had come quick and cruel. It crept in during a summer Lily barely remembered, and by the time the leaves had changed, she was gone. Cancer, they said, as if one word could ever explain the empty chair at the dinner table or the silence in the hallways at night. After that, Lily stopped speaking as much. Not completely. She still answered questions, still whispered, "Thank you," and "I'm okay" when asked, but her voice rarely rose above a murmur. It was as if she'd packed her words away, hidden them somewhere safe until the world became a little less sharp. She moved in with her grandmother, Eleanor, a sturdy woman with tired eyes and kind hands. The house smelled like cinnamon and old quilts, and Lily took to it quietly, like a leaf drifting into a gentle stream. Eleanor tried everything to help Lily find her smile again. Trips to the library, weekend pancakes with smiley faces made from blueberries, painting classes at the community center. Most days, Lily played along with a polite patience beyond her years. But nothing stuck. Nothing pulled the light back into her. That Saturday morning, Eleanor suggested they visit the county fairgrounds. Just a walk around, she said as she folded Lily's jacket over her small shoulders. Get some sun, maybe see some animals. Lily gave a soft nod. She liked animals. Or maybe she just liked how animals didn't ask her to explain how she felt. They didn't try to fix her. They just existed quietly, honestly, like her. The auction barn sat near the edge of town. Eleanor hadn't intended to go inside, but curiosity tugged at her. A sign out front read, "Adoption Day, Dogs Needing Homes." She figured it couldn't hurt to peek. They walked past rows of cages. Puppies bounced on all fours, tails wagging with reckless hope. Bigger dogs barked and leapt as people passed, each trying their best to be chosen. Volunteers called out breeds, described temperaments, handed out flyers with big-eyed photos and discount coupons for chew toys. But Lily didn't look at those dogs. She wandered further, letting the noise fade behind her. Her feet stopped in front of the final kennel, the one everyone else had walked past. There, sitting like a faded shadow against the back wall, was Rusty. He didn't lift his head, just flicked an ear, the way someone half asleep might stir when they feel eyes on them. The two of them stared at each other for a moment. Then Lily did something no one expected. She sat down on the dusty concrete floor, cross-legged, her skirt brushing against her sneakers. She didn't reach out, didn't speak right away. She just sat, watching, waiting. The dog's head turned slightly, just enough to see her more clearly. Their eyes met, one pair dark and tired, the other wide and sad in a way no child's eyes should be. Finally, Lily leaned in just a little and whispered, "I know how you feel." It was only 5 words, but in that quiet barn, they rang louder than any bark or call. Eleanor, who had been glancing through a pamphlet nearby, turned her head at the sound of Lily's voice. She blinked, then stepped slowly toward her granddaughter. "Sweetheart," she said softly, her voice unsure. But Lily didn't turn. Her eyes stayed fixed on Rusty. The auctioneer, overhearing the interaction, chuckled dryly. "That one?" he asked. "He's not much of a catch, miss. Been here for weeks. Doesn't bark, doesn't eat much, barely moves. Not what you call a kid's dog. Lily looked up at the man, her voice firmer this time. He doesn't need to bark. The man scratched his neck, a little thrown off by the calm, steady tone from the small girl on the floor. Eleanor was watching now, brow furrowed. "Are you saying you want this one?" she asked gently. Lily nodded. "But why? There's so many friendlier dogs. Younger, healthier ones too. He's sad," Lily said plainly, "and tired, but he's still here." The words hung in the air like a thread of truth no one wanted to touch. Eleanor's lips pressed together. She looked down at the dog, then back at her granddaughter. Rusty hadn't moved a muscle, but his eyes, they weren't empty anymore. There was something flickering there, faint but real, something like recognition. Eleanor sighed. "We didn't come here to adopt a dog, honey. I didn't come here to talk either," Lily replied. "But I did." That one sentence hit harder than any logic. Eleanor's breath caught. There it was, her granddaughter's spark. Quiet, but undeniable. She didn't answer right away. Instead, she crouched beside Lily, looked into the kennel, and studied Rusty. He looked back. No tail wag, no eager eyes. But there was no fear either. No growl. Just stillness, and something that looked an awful lot like acceptance. Maybe even trust. After a long moment, Eleanor patted Lily's shoulder. "Let's talk to the man about him," she said softly. "See what it would take to bring him home." Lily didn't smile, but her hand reached out slowly and touched the edge of the cage, palm open and steady. Inside, Rusty didn't flinch. And for the first time in a very long time, maybe even ever, he leaned forward. Not far, just enough to let his nose rest near her fingers. Not touching, just close enough to say, "I see you too." The drive home from the auction was supposed to be quiet. Eleanor had assumed Lily would simply walk away after sitting with that old dog for a few minutes. Maybe ask a few questions, maybe linger a bit longer than usual. But eventually, like always, they would head home, and Lily would forget by morning. She hadn't expected a standoff. The moment they reached the truck, Lily crossed her arms, leaned against the passenger door, and stared at her grandmother with the kind of intensity that only quiet children could muster. "Sweetheart," Eleanor said gently, placing the car keys into her worn leather purse. "You know we weren't planning to bring a dog home today." "I know," Lily replied, her voice soft but firm. "But we have to bring him home." Eleanor sighed. "Honey, I get it. I really do. He's a sweet soul. But dogs are a big responsibility. And we don't know what kind of care he'll need. His leg." "He doesn't need to run," Lily interrupted. "He just needs to stay." There was a pause, long enough for a breeze to lift the hem of Lily's sweater, and for Eleanor to notice the way her granddaughter's fingers trembled, even though her face stayed composed. Eleanor looked toward the auction barn, back at the people still milling around, scooping up younger dogs, pointing out playful puppies. She hesitated. "We live on a fixed income, Lily. You know that. Food, vet bills, it all adds up. I don't need a birthday party this year," Lily said quickly, "or Christmas presents, or anything." "Lily, I mean it." The words came out stronger than Eleanor expected. It stopped her in her tracks. "You don't have to give up anything, baby," she said, kneeling down to Lily's level. "But we need to think this through. You're still little. Taking care of a dog, especially one that's been hurt, that's not a small thing." Lily didn't look angry. She didn't cry. She didn't plead in the way most children might. No wailing, no stamping feet. Instead, she reached into her backpack and pulled out a small pink piggy bank, ceramic, faded, with a crack down one ear. Eleanor had forgotten she even still used that old thing. Lily held it up with both hands. "This is for him." "Honey, it's for a friend," she said quietly. "I've been saving. Mom helped me start it. She said I should use it when I find something really important." There was no dramatics, just truth. Eleanor felt something tug hard at the space beneath her ribs. She reached for the piggy bank slowly. "You sure about this?" Lily nodded. Eleanor turned the small bank over, removed the rubber stopper, and let the coins fall into her palm. Quarters, dimes, a few folded dollar bills. Not much. Maybe $10, $11 total. but it felt heavier than gold. Behind them, the auctioneer was closing out paperwork for a family picking up a golden retriever puppy. Eleanor stood and walked back toward the barn, leaving Lily with the piggy bank cradled in her lap like something sacred. "Excuse me," Eleanor called a man. "The dog," the shepherd with the limp. "What's the process to take him?" The man looked up, surprised. "Rusty? You sure? He's a handful. Doesn't bark, barely eats. Seems depressed, if you ask me." Eleanor gave a dry smile. "Well, we're not exactly looking for a party dog." The man nodded toward a clipboard. "Paperwork simple. $20 adoption fee. Couple of signatures. He's microchipped, up to date on shots. But I'd recommend a vet visit sooner rather than later. He's not in great shape." Eleanor reached into her purse and, hesitating only briefly, added the rest of what was needed. As she signed the final form, she felt the familiar tug of practicality pulling at her, warning her about vet bills, food, time, effort. But louder than that was the sound of Lily's voice in the barn earlier. "I know how you feel." And that was something she hadn't heard in far too long. 15 minutes later, with a worn leash and a folded folder of papers in hand, Eleanor returned to Lily, who was still sitting by the truck. Rusty walked slowly beside her, his limp evident but steady. He wasn't resisting. He wasn't pulling. He just moved as if he wasn't sure where he was going, but trusted it might be better than where he'd been. Lily stood without a word, opened the truck door, and gently patted the seat beside her. Rusty paused at the open door, looked at Lily, then with effort climbed in, not gracefully, not quickly, but fully. Eleanor climbed into the driver's seat, adjusting the rearview mirror to glance at the pair behind her. Lily was sitting perfectly still, one hand resting lightly on Rusty's back. The dog didn't flinch, didn't move away. Eleanor smiled to herself and turned the key in the ignition. As the old pickup rumbled to life and pulled onto the gravel road, she glanced at her granddaughter and said, "You know, we're probably going to have to teach him to do all sorts of things." Lily looked up and, for the first time in a long while, smiled. "Maybe," she said, "but I think he already knows the most important one." "What's that?" "Staying." And with the road stretching ahead of them and the soft sound of breathing from the back seat, they drove home together. Not just a girl and her grandmother anymore, but a little family beginning again, in the quiet way only real things do. Rusty didn't walk into the house that first day. Even with the truck parked in the shade and the front door wide open, he stopped at the edge of the wooden steps and laid down, not from exhaustion, but from something deeper, something like hesitation carved into habit. Lily sat on the porch next to him, her legs tucked beneath her, arms hugging her knees. She didn't say anything. She didn't need to. The quiet between them had already become a language of its own. Eleanor watched from the screen door. "You know he can come inside, right?" she called gently. Rusty didn't move. "He'll come when he's ready," Lily replied, eyes still fixed on the dog's face. "Some people just need to know they won't be chased away." Eleanor didn't argue. She knew what Lily meant without needing the words spelled out. By sunset, Rusty still hadn't moved from his spot. Eleanor brought out a faded quilt and set it on the porch floor. Lily fetched a shallow bowl of clean water, carefully placed next to a dish filled with bits of roast chicken and brown rice, leftovers from last night's dinner. Rusty didn't eat that night. He sniffed the food once, then turned his head away. Still, he didn't leave. The porch became his space. He slept there under the overhang, curled up near the far corner, his head resting against the wall like someone waiting to be told whether they could stay or needed to go. His breathing was shallow but steady, and whenever the wind picked up, rustling the old trees at the edge of the property, one of his ears would flick, an involuntary trace of the soldier he had once been. The days passed slowly, and Lily made a routine of joining him each evening after dinner. She would bring her sketchbook and a cup of cocoa. She never tried to touch him, never reached out. She simply sat there and drew. She drew pictures of her mother, at the beach, in the kitchen, holding a sunflower against the sky. She drew pictures of herself, smaller, alone, surrounded by things that no longer felt the same. And eventually, she started to draw Rusty, not as he was, but as she imagined he had once been. standing strong, alert, his fur shining. She drew him in a field of tall grass. She drew him beneath stars. She even drew him sitting beside her, heads touching, both staring off into the same horizon. She would tear the drawings out one by one and gently place them near his bedding. Not too close, just enough that he could see them if he wanted to. Some mornings, she'd find the papers nudged slightly, wrinkled at the edges, proof that he had at least looked. Eleanor watched this slow dance from the kitchen window with a mix of wonder and caution. It wasn't how people usually train dogs. But then again, Rusty wasn't a usual dog, and Lily wasn't a usual child. There was no barking, no tail wagging, no licks on the hand, but there was presence. And sometimes, that's all healing really needs. On the fourth night, the air turned cooler. Autumn was creeping in around the edges. Eleanor brought out a space heater for the porch, just in case, and left the door cracked open a few inches. That night, Lily curled up on the top step, her sketchbook in her lap. She didn't draw. She just stared out into the fading dusk. Rusty lay nearby, eyes half closed, body still, but not tense. Mom used to say silence is where God does his best work. Lily whispered. The wind carried her voice, light as thread. Rusty didn't lift his head, but his breathing changed. Slower, deeper, calmer. Lily continued, almost to herself, I think maybe you've been silent for too long. She stood, quietly walked inside, and left the door open wider than before. Rusty didn't follow, but he watched. The next morning, Eleanor found muddy paw prints near the doorframe. Not inside, just near, like a promise waiting for courage. A few days later, when a delivery truck rumbled down the gravel road, Rusty didn't retreat behind the porch column like he had before. He stayed where he was, ears perked, head tilted slightly. And that night, for the first time, he took a few tentative steps past the front door. Not all the way in, just to the threshold. He stood there, nose twitching, eyes scanning the quiet room, then turned and returned his quilt without sound. Lily didn't react. She just smiled into her cocoa. It was progress. Some mornings, when Eleanor opened the curtains, she saw Lily still sitting on the porch steps in her pajamas, hair messy, rubbing sleep from her eyes as Rusty sat beside her like a sentinel. Neither spoke. They didn't need to. They had become two kinds of quiet, finding shelter in each other's stillness. It would be weeks before Rusty stepped fully into the house. But even in those early days, those long, uncertain hours spent beneath the slant of afternoon sun and the creak of old porch boards, something had already shifted. He wasn't a guest anymore. Not exactly. He was just someone learning how to come home in his own time. And Lily, more than anyone, understood what that meant. It happened on a Wednesday, just after lunch, when the sun hung high and lazy above the yard, casting soft shadows from the pecan trees out back. Lily had been playing alone, as usual. She wasn't the kind of child who ran wild or screamed for attention. Her play was quiet, imaginative, inward. That day, she was tracing invisible patterns in the dirt with a stick, building shapes only she understood. The air was warm but not stifling, the kind that makes time stretch a little. Rusty lay on the porch nearby, his body curled in its usual crescent, his chin resting over his front paws. He watched her through half-lidded eyes, his ears twitching now and then, tracking birds or the creak of the porch swing. Then came the fall. It wasn't dramatic, no loud cry or sharp snap, but was enough. Lily's foot caught on a root, her body pitched forward, and her hand slammed into the dirt. One knee scraped against a small stone. She gasped, and for a moment she didn't move. Just sat there, hunched over, shoulders stiff, hands cradling the forming bruise on her elbow. From the porch, Rusty lifted his head. He didn't spring into action. He wasn't that kind of dog. But something in Lily's silence had shifted the air. He rose slowly, with the cautious grace of an animal that still second-guesses every step. His injured leg made his gait uneven, but he moved with purpose, down the steps, across the grass, until he stood beside her. Lily looked up, her cheeks smudged with dirt and her bottom lip trembling, though she hadn't started crying. Rusty didn't sniff her or lick the wound. He simply sat. Then, very gently, he lowered his head onto her thigh. The weight was light, but steady. His warmth pressed against the fabric of her jeans, and for the first time, the contact came from him. Not because someone had reached out to pet or soothe, but because he had decided to be close. Lily's body relaxed. She let her fingers rest against his neck. Just lightly. She didn't speak. She didn't need to. They stayed that way for several long minutes. Two quiet figures beneath the sky, neither quite sure how to explain their pain, but content to share it. From the kitchen window, Eleanor had been watching. When she stepped out, her boots crunching softly over the gravel path, Rusty's ears perked. Lily tensed. It was the first time Rusty had been this close. So close and so still, and she wasn't sure what would happen if someone else approached. But Eleanor didn't rush them. She slowed her pace, her hands open and relaxed at her sides. "Lily," she said softly. "You all right, baby?" Lily nodded. "I just tripped." Eleanor glanced at Rusty, then back at her granddaughter. Rusty stood, not abruptly, not startled. He rose slowly, his legs stiff but controlled, and he looked directly at Eleanor. For a split second, the world seemed to pause. But then Rusty did something none of them expected. He walked over to Eleanor, just a few steps, enough to close the gap. Then he sat down near her feet, close, but not touching, and lifted his gaze toward her face. He didn't whine, didn't bark, just waited. Eleanor crouched, not reaching for him, but acknowledging his presence with a nod. "Well," she said gently, "looks like you decided we're not so bad after all." Rusty blinked once, slow and deliberate. That evening, something shifted. They didn't celebrate. There were no big declarations or dramatic moments. But change, once it arrives, doesn't always need trumpets. Sometimes it's a glance, a quiet gesture, a weight rested on a knee. The next morning, Rusty appeared by the table while Lily ate her toast. He didn't beg for food. He simply sat nearby, his eyes calm, his body still. When Eleanor placed a second bowl on the floor, one with small bits of cooked egg and softened kibble, Rusty ate, not with a ravenous gulp of starvation, but with slow, careful bites. From that point forward, a rhythm began to grow. They took walks together around the perimeter of the property. Short ones at first, Lily in her pink sneakers, Rusty trailing beside her, his limp still visible but no longer defining. He sniffed the trees, watched the birds, and sometimes stopped to sit in the shade, waiting for her to catch up or finish talking to a flower. In the late afternoons, they sat on the porch and listened to Eleanor's old radio. It was always tuned to a station that played golden oldies, soft piano, slow guitar, sometimes the kind of crooners that made Eleanor hum under her breath while watering the plants. Lily leaned against the post, Rusty at her side. Sometimes she read aloud. Sometimes she didn't say a word. Rusty no longer flinched when the wind slammed the screen door or when a passing truck rumbled by. He still didn't like sudden noises, but he didn't disappear under the porch anymore. He had learned the sounds of this place. More importantly, he had learned who belonged in it. Eleanor once commented, half laughing, half sincere, "You two are like an old married couple, never in a rush, never far apart." Lily just smiled. Rusty didn't wag his tail, but he stayed. Every day now he stayed, not because someone told him to, because he wanted to, because somehow the rhythm of a little girl who barely spoke and a dog who had nearly given up had finally found a shared beat, and that, more than any command or leash, was what made them family. The storm rolled in just after sundown. At first, it was nothing more than a whisper on the wind, leaves rustling in warning, the trees bowing slightly as if bracing for what was coming. The air grew heavy and the sky dimmed from soft lavender to steel gray. Inside the small country house, Lily was coloring at the kitchen table, while Eleanor washed dishes. The radio played quietly in the background, an old ballad, the kind Eleanor liked to hum along with when she thought no one was listening. Rusty was lying near the back door, his body stretched out on a braided rug, eyes half closed, his breathing slow and steady. He looked peaceful, at ease in a way that had taken weeks to build. Then the thunder cracked. Not distant, not polite. It exploded across the sky like a gunshot, sudden and sharp. Rusty jolted upright, ears flattened, eyes wide. Before either of them could react, He darted beneath the kitchen table, his body low to ground, tail tucked so tightly it almost disappeared under him. He trembled, visibly, uncontrollably. Lily's crayon froze midline. She looked down at the dog beneath the table, her expression shifting from curiosity to concern. Another crack of thunder followed, and Rusty flinched so hard his shoulder bumped against the table leg. A low, almost inaudible whine escaped his throat. Eleanor dried her hand slowly, eyes narrowing. "That's not fear," she said softly, mostly to herself. "That's memory." The rain began to pour, fat drops hammering the roof and windows, drowning out the radio. The lights flickered once, but held. Lily slid off her chair and crawled under the table beside Rusty. He didn't look at her. He couldn't. His eyes were locked on the far wall, but his breath came in short, shallow bursts. Lily placed a hand gently on the floor near him, not touching, just offering presence. "Is he going to leave me?" she asked, her voice barely above the storm outside. Eleanor, now sitting on the step down from the kitchen, paused. "Why would you think that?" Lily's eyes didn't move. "Because Mom did." The words hung there, quiet, but louder than any thunder. Eleanor felt them settle deep in her chest. "Honey," she began but stopped. Then she stood and walked slowly across the room. She didn't crawl under the table, but she sat on the floor next to it, close enough that her knees brushed the edge. She rested her hands in her lap and looked out the window. Rain streaked down the glass like tears that had been waiting a long time to fall. "Your grandpa," she said, her voice low and even, "used to shake like that when he heard helicopters." Lily looked over, surprised. "He did." Eleanor nodded. Every 4th of July, every summer storm, the moment that sound came, whoosh, 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 he'd freeze up. Sometimes he'd crawl into the closet, just sit there with the door closed. "What did you do?" "I sat with him," she replied. "Sometimes I brought him a sandwich. Sometimes just silence." Rusty let out another soft whine. Eleanor scooted a little closer to the table. "You don't always have to fix someone to help them," she said. "Sometimes you just stay close, so they know they're not alone." For the next several minutes, none of them said anything. Lily leaned her back against one table leg. Rusty's side brushed gently against her shoulder. His trembling had lessened, not gone, but slower now, like a wave losing steam. Eleanor hummed under her breath, the same tune that had been playing before the storm, a soft, familiar melody that didn't ask anything of anyone. Another rumble of thunder came, this one slower, rolling. Rusty didn't flinch this time. His ears remained down, but his breathing had started to settle. Lily finally leaned her head back and rested it lightly against his side. "I don't want him to be afraid forever," she whispered. Eleanor reached across the table edge and gently brushed a hand against Lily's arm. "He won't be. Neither will you." Lily didn't answer. She just closed her eyes. Eventually, the rain slowed. The thunder moved farther off, grumbling now like an old man still muttering long after the argument was over. Rusty let out a deep breath, like something inside him had unclenched. Eleanor stood and moved the stove. "How about hot chocolate?" she asked, her voice intentionally casual. Lily nodded. Rusty didn't move, but his head tilted toward the sound of the kettle being filled. By the time the storm ended completely, the kitchen lights cast a warm golden glow on the wooden walls. Eleanor poured 2 mugs of cocoa and placed one on the table. Lily crawled out slowly, careful not to disturb Rusty. As she climbed into her chair, she glanced back at him. He remained under the table, but turned his head slightly to follow her movement. For the first time since the storm began, his eyes weren't wide with panic. They were tired, yes, but aware. "Can we make him a bed in my room tonight?" Lily asked quietly. Eleanor smiled. "We can try." That night, Rusty didn't sleep in the bedroom, but he did come inside, further than before. He lay just past the hallway, close enough to see Lily's door. His body curled again, but it was the curl of someone resting, not retreating. Eleanor turned out the lights and stood in the dark for a moment, watching both of them from the doorway. Storms, she thought, don't just bring back memories. Sometimes they rinse them out just enough to make space for something new. Every neighborhood has that neighbor. The one who seems allergic to small talk, allergic to kids, and especially allergic to dogs. On their street, that person was Mr. Bob Hanley. He was 73, a retired mechanic, and had lived in the same weather house with a peeling green mailbox for over 4 decades. His lawn was always trimmed with military precision, his hedges clipped as if measured with a ruler, and his fence, tall, white, and newer than the rest of his place, was built just a month after Rusty moved in next door. Mr. Bob didn't wave when he passed by. He didn't smile. He grunted, nodded on rare occasions, and mostly kept to himself. And he made it known, early and often, that he did not like dogs. "Got bit when I was 8, he grumbled to Eleanor one afternoon as she collected mail. "Left a scar on my ankle and a bigger one on my trust. Never bothered with them since." When he spotted Rusty for the first time, lounging in the sun near the porch, his scowl deepened. "That one looks like trouble," he said through the fence. "Shepherd mix, huh? They always look like they're thinking. Can't trust a dog that watches more than it barks." Eleanor had simply shrugged. "He doesn't bark at all, actually." Mr. Bob grunted. "Even worse." Within the week, he added another 2 feet to his fence, just high enough that Rusty couldn't peek over anymore, even if he tried. And when he saw Lily walking the dog near the property line, he muttered something about kids not being safe around unpredictable animals, and went back inside, letting his screen door slam behind him. Lily, of course, heard every word. "He's just scared," she told Rusty one morning, crouched beside him on the porch. "Some grown-ups forget how to be brave after something bad happens." Rusty didn't react, but his ears twitched at her tone, as if he understood more than anyone gave him credit for. Then, everything changed on a Tuesday afternoon. It was late spring. The sun was bright, the sky wide open. Lily was inside working on a craft project for school, and Eleanor was baking bread, filling the house with warmth and cinnamon. Rusty was napping near the screen door, his head resting on his front paws. Then came the sound, barely there at first. A faint clang, then a muffled thud. Rusty's head lifted. Another moment passed, then silence. And then something, perhaps a scent or a memory, sent him bolt upright. Without warning, he lunged at the door, pawing frantically at the screen and letting out a low, urgent whine. Lily looked up from the kitchen table. Rusty pawed again, this time more deliberately, turning toward her with a look she'd come to recognize, not fear, not excitement, but something else, a need to tell her something. She followed him to the door. "Rusty?" she asked. He whined again and looked toward the neighbor's fence. Then she heard it too, a groan, soft, pained, from behind the tall white boards. Lily bolted. Eleanor, catching the urgency in her voice as she called for help, followed seconds later. They raced around the fence gate and found Mr. Bob lying on the ground near his garden hose, one hand clutching his chest, the other trying to steady himself against the flower bed. His face was pale, sweaty. "Call 911. Eleanor ordered, kneeling down beside him. Lily didn't hesitate. The ambulance came fast, just over 6 minutes, though it felt longer. The EMTs said it was a mild heart attack. He was lucky, they said. Lucky someone found him in time. Lucky someone noticed. No one said lucky a dog noticed. But they didn't have to. Mr. Bob was released a few days later. He came home with a new prescription list, a bit more color in his cheeks, and, according to rumor, a whole lot of embarrassment about being saved by a mutt. He didn't mention it to anyone. But that Saturday evening, while Eleanor trimmed lavender by the porch and Lily drew in her sketchbook, Rusty looked up suddenly. There was a soft thunk near the side fence. A small plate, metal, dented, lay in the grass. On it, 3 strips of beef, not quite cooked, but not raw either. Rusty approached slowly, sniffed. Then gently, he picked up a piece and brought it to Lily, placing it beside her foot. "What's that?" Eleanor asked from the steps. Lily smiled, glancing toward the fence. "I think it's an apology." They didn't hear a word from Mr. Bob that day. But the next evening, just as the sun dipped low and cicadas began their chorus, another plate appeared, this time with chicken. The next week, it was a slice of ham. Occasionally, a single dog biscuit, still in its wrapper. And every time, the same gruff voice followed from behind the fence. Don't get used to it. Or, just had leftovers. Or, don't tell anyone, you hear? One day, Lily caught a glimpse of him through a knot in the fence. He was standing there with a small smile he probably didn't realize he was wearing. She whispered, "Thank you." The smile vanished, replaced by a clearing of his throat. "That dog still quiet?" "Yes, sir." "I'm good." Rusty never barked. He never jumped a fence or wagged his tail at Mr. Bob. But sometimes, in the quiet hours before dinner, he'd sit by the edge of the yard, just close enough to be seen, not asking for food, just being there. And that was enough, because sometimes healing doesn't come in hugs or speeches. Sometimes it comes on an old dented plate passed over a fence, one silent truce at a time. It was one of those soft, early spring afternoons where the world seemed to pause, not for anything grand, but for the simple reason that everything just felt right. The sky was a calm, unbroken blue. Children's laughter carried lightly on the breeze. Birds chirped somewhere in the distance, and a faint scent of fresh-cut grass floated to the open air of Millstone Park. Lily and Eleanor had picked their usual bench near the willow tree, the one with a good view of both the playground and the duck pond. Rusty, as always, had come along. He walked beside Lily like a shadow that chose her over the sun, his gait still slightly uneven but purposeful, confident. Eleanor had packed a simple lunch, PB&J sandwiches, apple slices, and a thermos of sweet tea that she shared with Lily in tiny paper cups. Rusty didn't beg for scraps. He never did. He just lay down beside the bench, head up, eyes alert, ears occasionally twitching as a squirrel darted by or a skateboard clattered across the concrete path. It had become their ritual. Saturdays or Sundays at the park, watching the world unfold in its usual rhythm. But that day, something different happened. Lily was the first to notice. Across the park, near the edge of the swings, a little boy sat alone on a blue picnic blanket. He couldn't have been older than 6 or 7. His arms were wrapped tightly around his knees, and he stared, not at the trees, not at the sky, not even at the children running around him, but at something only he could see. He didn't move, not even when a red ball rolled near his feet, and another child rushed past to grab it, not even when the wind tugged at the corner of his blanket. His stillness was so complete, so absolute, it almost didn't match the park at all. Sitting a few feet behind him was a woman, his mother, it seemed. Her eyes never left him. There was exhaustion in her posture, but more than that, there was patience, the kind that only comes from loving someone through silence, through routines, through things other people will never understand. Lily leaned toward Eleanor. "Can I take Rusty for a walk?" Eleanor nodded, not needing to ask where or why. Lily stood, brushing crumbs from her jeans, and gave a quiet signal. Rusty followed without hesitation. They walked slowly, not directly toward the boy, but along a wide arc casual. Gentle, Lily knew how to let Rusty lead. When they were within about 10 feet, Rusty paused. He didn't bark. He didn't whine. He simply stood still, ears perked, head tilted ever so slightly as he looked at the boy. Then, without being asked, he walked forward. Lily stopped walking and simply waited. Rusty approached the boy with a caution that was almost reverent. He didn't charge. He didn't wag his tail. He didn't make a sound. He stopped about 2 feet away and slowly lowered himself into a sitting position, then lay down, resting his body just parallel to the edge of the boy's blanket. And then he stayed. The boy didn't react at first. His gaze remained fixed on that invisible point in the distance. But after a moment, maybe 2, the boy turned his head. It was a small movement, tentative, but it happened. His eyes, deep and unreadable, landed on Rusty. Rusty didn't blink. He didn't lean forward or shift his weight. He simply breathed, steady and slow, in a way that made space for the boy's presence instead of demanding it. Then came the moment no one expected. The boy reached out his hand. Not all the way, just a few inches. His fingers floated in the air between them, hovering, hesitant. Rusty didn't move to meet him. He just remained, still and solid, offering no pressure, only presence. The boy's fingers curled slightly, then relaxed again. His hand hovered a moment longer, and then dropped gently to the grass. From behind, the boy's mother brought a hand to her mouth. She stood slowly, walking toward them with careful steps, as if afraid the moment might break if approached too quickly. When she reached Lily, her voice was hoarse. He's never done that before. Lily glanced at her, then back at Rusty and the boy. He's good at meeting quiet people, Lily said softly. The ones who don't ask anything. The woman's eyes shimmered. My son hasn't reached for anyone in 2 years. Not since his diagnosis. He doesn't even touch me. Rusty turned his head slightly, just enough to glance at Lily, then back at the boy. His tail gave a single, slow wave in the grass. The boy didn't flinch. He just watched, quiet and curious, the way someone watches rain for the first time. Is it okay if we stay here a bit longer? The mother asked. Lily nodded. He's not in a hurry. And so they did. They didn't talk much after that. The mother sat cross-legged behind her son, tears slipping down her cheeks in silence. Lily sat beside Rusty, her hand resting gently on his back. The boy's hand inched closer again, not touching, but near, the kind of near that mattered more than contact. And Rusty never moved. He just lay there, solid and calm, the way only those who've lived through storms can do. Eventually, the shadows grew longer and the park began to empty. Rusty stood slowly, stretched, and looked at Lily. The boy looked up at his mother and whispered something inaudible. But whatever it was, it made her cry all over again. As Lily and Rusty turned to go, she looked back and smiled. He finds the ones who feel invisible, she said to no one in particular. And somewhere between the goodbye they didn't say and the connection they didn't need to explain, a small part of the world healed itself that day, with no fanfare, no audience, and no command. Just a quiet dog and a gentle hello. It was late afternoon, the kind of hour when time feels slower, not because the day is long, but because it doesn't need to hurry anymore. The golden light from the west poured to the lace curtains of the living room window, casting soft, wavy shadows on the wooden floor. Outside, the wind barely rustled the trees. It was quiet, but not empty. It was the kind of quiet that only comes when people are at peace. Rusty lay stretched out on a rug, his head gently resting across Lily's legs, as if her lap were his natural pillow. His chest rose and fell in steady rhythm, not quite asleep, but not entirely alert either. Every so often, his tail gave a lazy thump against the floor, not a full wag, just a flicker of contentment. Lily, cross-legged and focused, held a crayon in one hand and a piece of paper in the other. She was coloring, carefully, patiently, the outline of a woman holding sunflowers. Her mother. The image was gentle, almost dreamlike, her strokes delicate in the places where the sunflowers met the woman's soft smile. She didn't speak. She didn't need to. Rusty's ear twitched with the sound of each color being set down, picked up, shifted. Yellow to green, green to soft blue. Her fingers moved with quiet purpose, not rushed, not tense. It was a moment of remembering, not with tears, but with love. On the other side of the room, Eleanor sat in her favorite chair by the window, a worn thimble on her thumb, and a needle threading back and forth through the sleeve of a button-up shirt. Her hands worked slowly, skillfully, sewing not just to repair, but to maintain the quiet dignity of a home that had been through enough and still chose to carry on. The radio hummed faintly in the background, playing something old and familiar. Frank Sinatra or maybe Nat King Cole, crooning about moonlight and second chances. It filled the room like a memory of someone you still miss, but don't mourn. Every so often, Eleanor glanced up, her eyes soft as they landed on Lily and the dog lying peacefully beside her. She didn't say anything. She just watched them the way one watches a sunrise, without commentary, simply grateful to be there. Then, from outside the house, came a sound. Barely there, a soft shuffle, the creak of a gate latch, a familiar rhythm of footsteps walking alongside the fence line. Rusty's eyes opened. He didn't move, but his ears turned toward the sound. Lily looked up, just in time to catch the shadow of Mr. Bob passing by the open part of the fence. He didn't stop, not fully, but his arm extended over the top of the railing, and something wrapped in a napkin landed gently on the grass. A small meat pastry, warm, slightly misshapen, and clearly homemade. "Thanks, Captain," Mr. Bob said softly, almost to himself. He turned and walked away without waiting for acknowledgement. Eleanor had heard him too. Her smile tugged at the corners of her mouth as she continued stitching. Lily reached down and touched Rusty's ear. "Looks like someone's keeping secrets," she whispered, grinning. Rusty didn't move. He didn't leap up or run to the fence like other dogs might have. He simply blinked slowly, then let his head press more deeply into Lily's lap, as if to say, "Let it wait." "I'm home." Outside, the shadows grew longer. The light coming through the windows turned warmer, richer, the kind of light that feels like a blessing even when no one says grace. There was no celebration, no camera flash, no grand announcement or perfect punctuation. Just three beings in a small house, a girl coloring a memory, a grandmother mending what can still be used, and a dog who had once been broken, but now simply was. No longer a project, no longer a question, just was. They didn't speak much that evening. Lily finished her drawing and tucked it gently into a box beneath her bed, a quiet collection of love letters to people she missed and those who had arrived in their place. Eleanor folded the mended shirt and set aside with practiced hands. Rusty stretched once, stood with a slight grunt, and padded over the front door. He lay there, facing outward, his ears relaxed, eyes half closed, like a sentinel who knew there were no threats worth worrying about. From the porch, the last bit of sun filtered through the slats of the railing, turning the floorboards gold. Mr. Bob's back porch light flicked on as he settled into his evening routine, likely sipping sweet tea and pretending he hadn't baked anything for a dog that week. In the kitchen, the radio faded into a gentle instrumental. No lyrics, just melody. Just enough to remind everyone in the house that something soft was still playing, even when no one danced. And so the day ended. No applause, no great twist, no finish line. Just another ordinary evening for people who had once been fractured in different ways. Now whole, not because they were repaired, but because they were received. Because love, in its quietest form, isn't loud or demanding. It's a girl coloring her memories, a grandmother sewing in silence, a dog lying nearby, just close enough to hear your heartbeat, and the soft sound of someone across the fence, tossing kindness without asking for credit. Sometimes the most beautiful endings don't feel like endings at all. They feel like sunlight through a window at the close of a long, good day.